Two, one. Good afternoon, everyone. We're happy you all could join us today for this very special youth event within the 40th annual Martin Luther King celebration. Us interns have been working with the Seattle Martin Luther King Organizing Coalition since October to help put this youth event together. And now we will all introduce ourselves with our names, grade, the schools we come from, and why we were interested in becoming interns in the first place. I will go first. My name is Brian Watson, and I'm a 12th grader at Garfield High School. I was interested in working with the MLK Coalition because I wanted to be a part of something I was inspired by long ago when my parents took me to a march, because I think it's important to serve and hear from the community. And as a Garfield student, I saw it fit that I should get to know more about the events that have historically taken place at the school that I go to.
My name is Kimani Leonard. I am 16 and I am a sophomore at Tacoma High School. I decided to join this coalition because I wanted to connect with my culture after going to a not so diverse high school.
My name is Kobe Williams. I'm a 10th grader at O'Day High School, and I wanted to join this coalition because of my dad doing a lot of similar work like this when I was younger.
Hi, I'm Yomi Hasalase. I'm a junior at Northbridge High School, and I decided to join the coalition because I'm passionate about helping and uplifting others, and I want to be able to contribute to social change in the local community.
And now that you know a little bit more about us, we're going to briefly talk about the significance of the MLK celebration. And we're going to announce the theme of this workshop, why we chose it, and then we'll explain what the rest of this event will include. So starting off, I think it's important to reiterate the milestone of this year being the 40th annual celebration of MLK Day. I want each of us to share our thoughts on that. Kobe, you want to go?
Well, I think my main thoughts is just that it's amazing that a single person was able to have such an impact that he has an entire holiday to himself, and also the fact that it's still celebrated 40 years later, and it just hasn't drifted at all away from what it was meant to be. And I'm glad we're all able to come together and celebrate it as a group or as a community.
I think it's important because you can see how far what Martin Luther King Jr. did has come to like all the way to where we are right now.
Naomi?
I agree with Kimani. Like, his legacy has been very prevalent, and that I think he'll be very happy with all the successes we've made since the past 40 years.
Solid. Furthermore, there are more interns this year than the last coming year, and we come from different places all across the region. We hope that this youth event causes this trend to continue in years to come. Now on to our theme. The theme for this year is 40 years of uplifting youth voices. And we chose this theme because we know that our voices and the voices of our peers are the most critical voices of change. We want this event to be a platform for discussions around topics important to young people and a way for other generations to understand and unite with us around our vision for what we want our future to look like. So with that being said, before we get into our main programming, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to listen to Lift Every Voice and Sing, or the Black National Anthem, submitted and performed by Nisha Griffin, a sophomore student from Garfield. Give us a moment. Like I said, this is Lift Every Voice and Sing by Nisha Griffin from Garfield High School. Okay, we will get back to that. We will take a short break.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we are back, and we are looking to have With Every Voice in Sing performed and recorded by Mr. Jay Griffin. And before we want to talk about our topics, we have 5 topics. We're starting with gun violence, and then we'll go on to the education system, youth mental health, reproductive rights, and gentrification. Those are the 5 topics that we came up with. We think it's important to have 5, especially seeing as though there are 5 of us. And we believe that these topics are important to the youth of today in particular. Would anybody like to speak on any of these topics in particular? Add to their importance and, you know, the reason why we chose them?
In my opinion, we chose these topics because they were the ones that are most important to our youth, and the ones that should be should have some light brought onto them.
Kobe, do you have any words for us?
I think the one that I would want to focus on the most if I had a choice would be the education, because although it seems like it, not everybody in America has access to the same things, the same resources, and the same education. So I believe if Martin Luther King Jr. was alive today, I think that would be something that he'd care about a lot. So yeah.
Okay. Naomi, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I believe there should be more discourse around youth mental health and reproductive rights, especially in the Black community, as there's a lot of stigma between those 2 topics.
Okay, I think we can get into our first topic of gun violence. And so with this topic, I think that, you know, it's important to think about some of the things that happened in recent past, like the Ingram shooting. That was a terrible event where a 14-year-old fatally shot a 17-year-old. Even just this past week, there's been a lot of coverage on the news of teens involved in gun violence or armed crime, and it caused for a lot of relevance for our voices to be heard on this issue. And I think that we can talk about how important is this issue right now today to be speaking about it. Kimani, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. So, gun violence and laws is a very important topic. It is also a saddening one, especially of things that have been happening as of recently. But gun violence has always been a problem, and it's becoming more of a problem in our society. And we all believe that something should be done about it. So we have a few things to share under this topic. There will be a video of a poem recorded on gun violence by Kiana Gladney, a 12th grader at Garfield High School. Then a discussion between us interns and any questions from viewers.
Yes. And another question that I want to ask is, how can young people be united for change around gun violence?
I think there's a lot that can be done by multiple people. Honestly, I think there's a lot we could say on this topic, and there are a lot of different answers. But me personally, I just think that we as youth could get more involved. Kobe or Naomi, do you guys have any opinion on this?
I think the problem is less with youths, but more of the adults that come before us, because I think it's all about culture, especially in, like, for example, Black communities. I don't think rap I don't think a lot of the time the messages that are being spread in rap, especially considering how gullible, I mean, not gullible, but like easy it is to influence children, especially younger ones, and listening to that stuff, having people around you who listen to that stuff do bad things will lead you to doing that type of stuff too. So I think it's all about culture, and I think the adults in our lives, or the people who are more mature and have better decision making, need to set good examples for their children. And also the people who are celebrities and stuff need to be able to set good examples as well, because they influence children quite a bit.
Brooklyn, do you have any words for us?
I feel like gun violence is become a large issue now, and I feel like if a gun violence event happens, and it will bring people together, because it's like everyone's kind of like mourning or just coming together to not explain, but like coming together to express the emotion that happened in the event.
Thank you. And Brooklyn, what school do you come from?
Garfield.
Great to hear it. Right now, we're going to take a short 3-minute break.
I have a question for the interns, and maybe you guys you feel like that's disconnected from you?
Me personally, I think, at least for me, that when you're seeing that the gun violence on the news is mostly of people of color, it puts you into the same position that you could honestly just be walking down the street or walking home or walking to school, and the same thing could happen to you, which is gives you a little bit anxiety sometimes, which is why I think a lot of parents are tell you to be safe and like check your surroundings when walking. And that's my opinion on it.
Okay, but as far as like people that you're going to school with respect to, gang membership, stuff like that, do you feel comfortable stepping in and saying that your involvement in this type of organization could potentially be fatal, or is that something culturally that you're not supposed to say? Are you supposed to just let people sort of do whatever they want at this phase?
My bad. You go first, Kimani.
Oh, well, I think that you should say something, but as teenagers or young people, it can be frightening to say something or feel like you shouldn't say something. But Kobe, I know you had a stance on it, so you can.
Well, from my perspective, I don't see any reason not to say something because the youngest years of your life are the most important. And obviously, oh, not obviously, some people have different circumstances, but if their parents aren't or somebody in their life isn't influencing them in the right way, I feel like it's your responsibility to try and help them, even if you're not necessarily in like a position where your opinion really matters the most. But you have to do what you have to do in order to help the people around you. And if like you're too scared to say something, I mean, deep down, you know that you should have done it and you'll just regret it later.
Yes, adding on to what Kobe you said, I think also reaching out to adults can also really help, like school counselors or anyone else in authority, if you don't want to bring yourself to that attention or become anonymous.
And what about what you're seeing in the national news with the shootings in schools? Like, do you have a response to that, or do you just feel like we're at a point now culturally where you just have to come to school every day and hope nothing happens to you?
I think it's important that we don't, get desensitized to as much as we can with all the shootings that happen, because it's something and I think that you know because it's a national sense, that's just brings more importance to it, and we need to continue to talk about ways that we can kind of come together and think about how can we change this and how can we contribute to this and also at the end of the day, knowing that this is something that's happening presently.
I agree with Brian on this one. I feel like schools should be the safest place you can really go to. Like even sometimes for people over your own home, because not everybody's home is a safe place, and I feel like school should be that safe place. And at the same time, it's a bit embarrassing as a country to have the most school shootings or mass shootings in general. So I think that is something we really need to focus on and like find some way we can influence a change in that aspect.
With that being said, that concludes our discussion on gun violence. Now we can move on to education. And Kimani, I know your cousin, Kendrick Glover, who is the executive director of Glover Empower Mentoring. You told me that you had done an interview with him. We answered a couple of questions about the education system, how it can be better, especially for students who are people of color. You want to have any words on that for us?
Yes, of course. So I interviewed my cousin Kendrick Glover. He used to be and still sometimes visits high schools as a high school counselor. He has his own business called Glover Empower Mentoring. They just help kids, and they have like programs there and everything. So I asked him a few questions about education, and I will be happy to share some of his thoughts. The first question I asked him is, what are 3 things you would change about the education system? In his words, I believe he said that there is multiple things that to him could be changed because there are like to him, ever since he was a counselor, there have always been like challenges for different types of students. And the things that he would change is the biggest thing is the curriculum for him, because to make the curriculum more diverse and be able to reach other people and for students to get the learning that they deserve. The next question I asked him was, do you believe there's still bias in education? He said yes, flatly yes. He believes that there is an ethnicity bias, that people, different ethnicities get treated different in the education system. It has to do with environment and a lot of other things. I also asked, do you think ethnicity and where you live affects education? He said definitely. He believes that, well, different schools in different districts get maybe better education or have more or even better resources than other districts may have. Therefore, that students from particular high schools may get treated differently or have better resources, such as different classes or extracurriculars, things like that. I also asked, if you could talk to your school self, your high school self, what would you say or what advice would you give? His advice was to stay in school. My cousin's story is that he took a different path in high school than he would recommend to high school students now. So his biggest piece of advice that he would have given himself and to students right now is stay in school, because at the end of the day, it benefits your future more than you know. What is the significance of having a MLK holiday to him specifically? And he said he believes that Martin Luther King had a great impact on
How is it now?
on our community and how our society is today. And he also said he believes there's a lot more improvements that could be done, but Martin Luther King is one of the people who got us to where we are today, which is better than where we were before. And the last question I asked Kendrick was, what do you think MLK would say about education if he was alive today? He said he believes that MLK would say that there are multiple things that need to be changed or need to be done. And that's what my cousin Kendrick Glover had to say about education.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Leonard. My question to you is, do you think anything has changed since your cousin was in high school? Kendrick is older than me. I don't want to give away my own age, but you're obviously younger than me. You're younger than Brian. So all of you guys are at different points in life. Do you think that race and ethnicity still has an impact on the quality of your education?
Yes. Yeah, somewhat I do. I think that I mean, even in today, if you are one of the only Black students in a classroom and the word slavery comes up, I believe that all heads will turn to you. And to me, that's just not fair. And I believe that you have AP classes such as US history or whatever history, but at least in my experience, the only Black history that is taught in schools is about slavery, which then forces people to look at you that one way. So I think there are still ethnicity issues that come up in school, at least in my opinion.
Adding on to that, yeah, I agree. And, I have been the multiple times the only Black student in classes. But speaking on content, what I remember from the interview with your cousin is that he spoke on the importance of having more culturally relevant curriculums. And I think that's an important thing to have for everyone.
So what about the actual academics themselves? I remember, so Brian, you go to Garfield. I don't know if it's like this anymore. When I was in high school, Garfield was getting criticized a lot because of the top floor, bottom floor dynamic as far as the AP classes. I know for me, I mean, I went to O'Day. I was one of two Black kids that got to take Spanish for 4 years because I didn't have to take language arts freshman year. The reason I didn't take language arts freshman year is because my entrance exam, I showed competency, I guess, in grammar, but that's a cultural thing, right? Because depending on the household you come from, your grammar might be different. And then because of that one piece of my life experience, I got to take an extra year of Spanish, which qualified me to go to California colleges, right? Which are generally schools people want to go to. Do you think that there's still stuff like that happening where, the quality of the education itself is impacted by what you look at?
Yes, I do. Yeah. With AP classes, like with any type of with testing, I think that's a big thing that really needs to be kind of reconstructed when it comes to language, like you said, because everyone essentially has their own language, and it really affects people of color the most when you're talking about, how you might when you're supposed to kind of be put in this box in terms of how you should test. In that sense, I think that even dating back as early to sixth grade, testing for honors classes, I think that is something that needs to be kind of examined because it seems to be essentially like the same scenario. And there's opportunities for people to retake the tests and almost automatically get a better score, which kind of creates a disparity between people who have the opportunity to retake the test, where you have to pay for it, and those who don't.
Thank you for that. That's deep. Naomi, Brooklyn, Kobe, do you have reflections on this question?
I don't think I can really have a lot of experience with this. Although, even though I'm a Black male myself, in my experience, hard work was all that it really took to be well in school. I don't obviously, I have a lot of experiences with having slightly racist teachers, as well as being the only Black kid in the entire school. So I had those experiences, but at the same time, working hard to get good grades and to show myself to everybody and to be outstanding was enough for me to get on the same level as them, but also go higher. So I don't feel like, for me specifically, the color of my skin affected my education. But obviously, I had a really supporting household, and I got lucky. So, yeah.
Well, let's push on that. I mean, do you think that that's because you go to O'Day, though? I mean, if you didn't go to a private school or a place where the opportunities are already unique, do you think it would be the same? Do you think your education is comparable to what Brian is getting, for example?
Well, what I meant by that was more of my before I got into high school, middle school, elementary school. For middle school, almost the entirety, I was the only Black kid, but I never really felt discouraged. I never really felt like I was different because, my parents never really raised me to try to look at people based on their ethnicity or the color of skin. It was more of who they were as a person, and if I thought they were good people or not. I'd say going to O'Day is definitely a unique experience and a very lucky experience, but I was supposed to go to Rainier Beach, and I would have not gone to O'Day had I not gotten a scholarship, which came from me working hard in middle school in order to get that. So I think you're right to a point, but I also think my point of me working hard and trying to be outstanding also still stands, even though I do go to O'Day, which is a very unique experience.
Okay, thank you for that. Naomi. Naomi, you're muted. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. To add on what Kobe said, I think that my experience is very similar to his in that I haven't really received much of a difference in education based on the color of my skin, except for a few microaggressions in middle school, but it wasn't that bad.
Okay, and do you feel like your school district and the school you're in is comparable to Seattle public schools, or do you think that's different?
I think it's slightly different, maybe in terms of like racial composition and other things. I mean, I think North Shore School District is a pretty good school district. So is Seattle Public, so they're both really good school districts. I do think there are some differences though.
Do you think that the different demographics in North Shore compared to Seattle public schools is potentially why the quality of education might be different?
I don't really think that impacts it.
Okay. And Brooklyn, did we get anything from you on this?
I didn't really ever have problems with my education because of my skin color. Maybe except last year when I was in Kent School District, I received a lot of like, not really racism, but like targeting. I felt like because of my skin color from students and teachers, but occasionally.
What does that look like when you say targeting?
Like we could be in class and it could be a group of like Black students maybe sitting together, and it could be a time where we can talk and we could not even be speaking, and the teacher would hear a noise and automatically think that it's maybe us. Or sometimes in like sports, I received a lot of like targeting. I felt like because I was the only like Black student.
Understood. So there's been some questions that have come up in the chat with respect to gun violence in an earlier topic. I just want to put these out to you guys. One of the questions is about security in schools. Are you in favor of having armed security in your schools, or are you a person that would make uncomfortable? I'd like to hear from each of you.
I think that's a good question. Me personally, I don't see that having armed security in schools would actually make school feel safer. If anything, I feel like it would make students feel more afraid. At least for me, it would. Because yes, I mean school shootings are obviously a problem, but I don't think that's the right way to go about it.
Do you have any thoughts as to what is the right way to go about it?
I mean, making students feel safe in their own school is a part of it. And like I said, I don't think police officers or security guards armed would make students feel safe. I think what would just make students feel safe is, sure, yes, having security, but I don't feel it necessary for them to be armed. I just think acknowledging that these things could happen, and just making sure that students are prepared, and if it was to happen. Kobe, Naomi, how do you guys feel about it?
Like you said, I don't think having security, armed security will help at all. I think it'll make me feel more afraid too. I do think maybe just having more security cameras around. Also, maybe if someone is like having some such activity, maybe just like doing bag checks and stuff. Yeah.
Kobe?
A study I read online a few months ago told me that about 86% of school shootings were caused by either bullying or a shooter trying to get revenge on somebody else. And well, I think if anything, I'd rather nip the problem at the bud and try to deal with that versus trying to make schools seem more safe, which would probably just be counterproductive by adding security guards. So I think trying to solve the problem via getting rid of why they would want to do that is a part of it, but obviously it's not that simple, and the human mind isn't that easy to interpret. So I feel like I would have to do a bit more studying in order to understand exactly what the best course of action would be.
That's a good point, Kobe. I mean, in your academic experience, you've been private school, public school, is bullying something that you think is still a serious problem? I mean, when I think of bullying, I think of like getting roasted. But then if you're the same person getting roasted all the time, then maybe it's not casual to you. Are you seeing that? Is that something that you've experienced, I guess, by visually, or is that something that you're just hearing about on the news?
Well, I think I've definitely been the butt of a lot of jokes when I was younger, but at the same time, I had a supportive family that made me feel like I was needed, and that what other people said didn't matter as much as how I felt about myself. So I can't really say I feel those experiences 100% because not everybody has that thing to fall back on that makes you feel good about yourself or makes you feel like you're needed. I would say at O'Day, there's not a lot of bullying, but definitely a lot of kids pick on people who ask them to stop and they just don't stop. And I don't feel like it's to the point where someone want to shoot up a school, but at the same time, a lot of people don't suspect someone wants to shoot at a school until it's already done. So I would say I've seen it happen. And yeah, that's basically it.
Wow, that's deep. Anybody else here have a reflection on, I guess, bullying in school, or maybe that's not the language you might use. Maybe you would call it something else. But are we seeing people in school maybe getting roasted and that going too far sometimes?
I think that roasting it starts as a fun joke and like where everyone's laughing, but I think there's a lot of times or a lot of moments in school where people take it too far and don't realize they took it too far. Sometimes those roasts are intentional to hurt other people, and then sometimes they're not, and they just end up hurting people, and they don't realize that they're hurting someone. At least it's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think like in the context of maybe friend groups, of course, you can say that they're, it's something that you would take lightly, but when it's maybe you're interacting with someone who you're not very much acquainted with, and they say something and it's directed towards you, and it has like a negative feeling towards it, then if that's something that recurringly happens, or they use, one moment to continuously harass you, essentially, I think that's where it begins to be problematic the most.
Do you think that people actually know, and I know that somebody spoke to this already a little bit, but do you think that people actually know where that line is?
I feel like it takes a little bit of thinking in your own like mind by yourself as to what you would be okay with people saying to you. I think how you grew up or who you're around really determines how much you're able to take. But like when you're roasting somebody or saying something rude, you're not thinking about most of the time, you're not thinking about how you would feel. And you're also not thinking of how people are different than you and how people may have had a different upbringing and might have different views. For example, at school, sometimes I'll be like having a debate with somebody, and I always forget to keep in mind the fact that other people had different upbringings, and that's a big reason as to why we won't agree sometimes. And things that seem obvious to me don't seem obvious to them. So I think that's a part of it. But at the same time, I think we all have a similar moral compass. And I think a lot of the time they're either insecure about themselves or they're just trying to show off in front of other people.
Okay. Naomi or Brooklyn, do you have a response? Well, they're both not saying anything, so we'll move on. This is actually pretty natural. Go ahead, Brian.
We could use this as a segue to pull in our discussion on mental health and the involvement with it in each of these other topics at the same time. One thing that we could talk about right off the bat is just in recent news, the Seattle Public School District has sued or filed a complaint against a lot of major social media platforms. So we could kind of start off thinking about what is the role of social media in mental health nowadays?
I actually saw that online and read about it a little bit. But so what I at least read about is how basically how Seattle schools are suing like big Instagram handle social media handles such as Instagram, TikTok, all of those things because they think it affects students' mental health, which I agree with because as far as like social media goes, there are always going to be posts I think that can make you feel inferior or bring up insecurities and just like I also think that social media can sometimes take your focus off of what's important. Like when people are going on their phones in school, it's normally to check social media. So I think when you start focusing more on like on other people and on the things that are going on social media, you sometimes lose focus on the things that are right in front of you. Um, I how do you guys feel about it?
I agree with what you just said. I feel like when you're not on social media, when you actually have something you're working towards or something you really care about, your life is a lot happier and you're a lot more productive. And at the same time, I'd say the feeling of like, for example, getting likes on Instagram or any other platform definitely feels good. Or when you see people like what you're putting out. But at the same time, it has a negative effect when they don't like when you're putting out or people don't agree with what you're saying. And also, my last point is that a lot of the things we see on social media aren't realistic. So people have unrealistic standards of how they should act, look, or just be in general.
Before we go further, I wanted to also discuss one more thing, just the definition of mental health itself and what your thoughts are about it. One definition in particular, and this is defined as a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. Do all of you think that that is a suitable definition for mental health? What are your thoughts on it? And what do you think overall impacts mental health? Those are the questions I'm asking.
I think that's a good definition for mental health. As far as what could affect youth mental health, I think at least as far as what I've seen, I think it's more so social media, your personal life, such as like things that are happening in your own household or between your friends and like school. For example, in school, I mean, at least for me, I know finals are coming up, so that's a stress in itself, as well as like tests and homework. And as you get into like high school and higher levels of education, the workload piles and it's just you start sometimes you can drown under the pile of work that you have. And at least I think all of our ages it's when you start getting jobs and things start getting more stressful because you have to start worrying about college applications, getting a job and all other personal life things on top of that. Like if you have siblings, you have to worry about babysitting them, younger siblings maybe. So just personally, I think those are a lot things that mainly affect youth mental health.
Nó cũng cũng liên quan tới cái tinh thần.
Thank you,
Um,
thank you for that, Brian. I have a question for you specifically. When I was in school, we didn't talk about this stuff. You know, mental health was kind of something that we viewed as almost like an excuse, right? But now I'm seeing it become more acceptable. Does this panel believe that mental health has always been something that students have struggled with? Or are you of the belief that because we're talking about it more and more people are aware? So basically, it's almost like because it's now in our consciousness, we now recognize it. Or do you think it was always there and this was something that was always affecting students, but nobody was willing to accept it?
Honestly, I think it's a mix of both. More so that it's the students, that this is something that students have always been kind of dealing with, but you know, in different ways, especially as you know time progresses. I think that the more we talk about it, the more people begin to kind of understand and define what it means to them and associate themselves with other people who do so at the same time. So I think I think it's a little bit of a mix of both, but more so that it's something that in people's own way have been dealing with originally, but might not have been speaking about it as much.
Naomi, do you have something?
Yeah, I think mental health always been an issue that has been happening with students, especially since the beginning of time. But I think as we've progressed, I think stigma has lessened, and now that there's more discourse around it, and there's more information on the internet that people can find more information about mental health and how resources and stuff to help improve their mental health as well.
Brooklyn?
I agree with Naomi because I feel like it has always been a problem, but now that people are talking about it, people are becoming more aware about it, and it's like more of a conversation than just people holding in what they're feeling.
Kobe, before I go to you, I'll ask this follow-up question and you can answer this. So this scenario is going to probably come up or does come up in school. Do you think it's fair for somebody to essentially get a mental health absence, for lack of better terms, on the date of an exam? Because for me, from a competitive standpoint, that person is getting more time to prepare for the exam. That person is essentially disqualifying themselves from dealing with the anxiety of the exam on that day. But that's something that everybody that chooses to take the exam has to overcome. How do you respond to something like that? Do you feel like, well, that person might have a special need, or do you think that it's unfair? Do you think that it's fair? What are your thoughts?
Well, depends. If everybody has the option to do it, then I think it's not fair if everybody can do it. You can't say oh, I didn't. What I mean is, if everybody has the option to take that break, or do you mean that? Is it everybody have the option, or is it just that person?
Well, everybody technically would have that option, right? If you're in a school where they're going to allow you to skip an exam because you have anxiety around taking that exam, then we will, at least in this hypothetical, give everyone that same opportunity. But what I'm saying is, do you have a response, or do you have feelings about that student essentially bypassing the same pressure that everybody else has to overcome at that time? Because everybody feels that anxiety, right?
I feel like it depends on what their life is outside of school. I mean, we say, oh, well, everybody has to go through that pressure, but not all our pressure is the same if we're not all having the exact same experiences in life. But at the same time, I think going through that anxiety and going through that stress is important to becoming a true adult and learning to actually be a functioning member of society. So I don't think people should just have any excuse to do what they need. I think maybe some type of mental health professional should be talked to in order to see if that is really a problem they're having, but I'm not sure exactly.
I think that's a great response. I think you hit the nail on the head that everybody is affected differently, and some of us do have maybe a different level of vulnerability around some of these topics, and that they're equally, they could be a serious challenge to one person, and they could be an inconvenience to the next person. I would always describe my anxiety as an inconvenience, but I also knew people who couldn't get out of bed, right? And that's just the nature of human beings. Like you said, the human brain is very complex, and it's hard to generalize one person's experience over a broad stroke. Brian, if you could take us to the next topic, I think we covered that.
Well, actually, right now we're going to have a brief intermission. I'm going to share my screen.
Is
Is my screen successfully shared? Okay.
Ryan, this is not the updated one that I just sent you. We are not able to access Spanish or Amharic right now. So we've got three 3 languages. We have Vietnamese, Chinese, and Somali.
Naomi? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say that I could try reading Amharic, but I'm not sure if I can translate so right now, so it's okay.
We would need, we're having trouble with the interpreter channels. We have the interpreters available, but not the channels working. So that is why we're just going to be offering these 3 languages. And with that, I will back to you.
So now our next topic is, I believe our next topic is gentrification. And we can start by saying, do all of you feel like your neighborhood or just like the region itself has faced a lot of gentrification over the years?
Brian, can you maybe explain to people like what that means for everyone out there who doesn't necessarily understand that?
Yes, it's essentially people being priced out of their neighborhood by a wealthier group of people who move in. Gentry itself is derived, or gentrification comes from gentry, which is a word that means wealthy elite. So gentrification is essentially a takeover by the wealthy elite.
I learned something new today, Brian. Thank you for that. So I guess the most basic question here, and feel free to answer this however you want, is do you think that there's anybody that can be entitled to a specific space? So like, for example, if your neighborhood is 10 people and all 10 of them for the last 100 years have looked the same way, do you think that as a result of being there for such a long time that they're entitled to that space, or do you feel like people move and that's just the way of the world?
That's a good question, because being entitled to that space, that's kind of a hard thing to really concretely speak upon. What I think is the matter of is, can you invest in a neighborhood without removing the people, essentially? I think that's kind of one of the biggest questions that we all kind of have to think about when it comes to, like, there's certain things where, like, it's not only that there's just these people here, but, what they've kind of made out of this space or this place, the history of it, the legacy of it, essentially. So in terms of that question, I think it's about kind of thinking about how you can invest in is it possible to invest in a neighborhood or a city or something like that without removing the people from it, essentially?
Go ahead, Kobe.
Do you mind repeating your question?
Yeah, so I think Brian's done a really good job of answering the question, but basically I was just asking, do you think it's appropriate for people to feel entitled to any physical space? Because a lot of times the counter argument to gentrification is saying, well, you don't have a monopoly on this land forever, and that is a response that you're going to get from people who don't really believe that this is a problem, which is why I posed the question. So, do you feel like that it's reasonable to feel entitled to a space like that, or do you think that that's born out of something else like history and culture, like Brian was saying?
I haven't really done much research gathering on the topic of gentrification, but I would say my first thoughts are the Native Americans of the past and the fact that what they would say most often is that just like water and just like the light from the sun, you can't own any part of the planet. So in my opinion, the planet is ever changing just like we are. And I don't feel like anybody really has the right to 100% own any area or space. But I think we should, but at the same time, wealthy people coming in and taking those spaces or like making it so that's harder for them to live there, they know that's unethical. So I don't think that's, I think that's more of a problem with them and not necessarily the fact that people can't move itself. But those are just like my first thoughts upon hearing it.
Kimani or Naomi or Brooklyn would like to respond to that.
I agree with Kobe. I think that I don't think you have a certain entitlement to a space just from living in it for so long. But I do think it's not fair for wealthy people to just come in and take your community from you to the point where you can't even live in it because you can't afford it. So that's my opinion on it. I don't think anyone can really like claim that is their space and it can't be taken away from them. But being taken away from them to the point where they can no longer live and in a community that they've lived in and strived on for so long, just because it was taken by the wealthy and they've made it to the point where you can no longer live in that community. I think that's unfair.
Brooklyn, I see you nodding.
I also agree because yeah, people might not be entitled to a land, but I also feel like when they're pushing people out just for wealthier people, I feel like it's not fair because then families are getting broken up and more people are having to move to farther parts where it's more affordable. And then in the case of where it used to be affordable, families were able to be together and now it's just everybody scattered and it's just harder.
Naomi, before I go to you, do you think that the fact that a neighborhood looks the way that it does? So, for example, South Seattle, South King County, historically minority dominated, in certain neighborhoods, mostly Black people. Do you think that those neighborhoods happened like that on accident, or do you think that housing codes and things like that are the reason why these neighborhoods kind of start the way that they do?
I definitely agree with you. I think housing codes are why those areas in South Seattle look the way they do. Because I know that my dad said originally a lot of African Americans did live in Capitol Hill, but then that area got gentrified and it got kicked out and relocated to lower income places.
Right. So I think the takeaway, at least, I think the reason why African Americans in Seattle have been so frustrated by what's happened is that these were areas where nobody wanted to live before. The Central District became popular as a place to live in recent memory, but there were times where you would never catch anybody that wasn't part of the community walking through there. And then as soon as it became desirable and there started to be money poured in and Garfield High School got renovated, for example, even though Garfield had been old and there were Black students there for 50 years, it wasn't worth renovating until people from outside the neighborhood moved in. And I think that that's the rub, right? Is that, like Brian said to begin with, the question is, why can't we invest in the community before? Why do we have to wait? Why is it that we're not deserving of a remodeled school? Why is it that we're not deserving of more AB and AP and whatever other acronym courses? Why is it that we have to wait until the student population gets more diverse to do that? I think that's the question that's being asked. And I think that it's a hard question to answer because, like some of you have said, what you would never say out loud is that this is our land and we're entitled to it. Because like you said, it's really not yours, it's the space you're occupying. But then we're occupying this space because discrimination put us here in the first place. And so it's like, wow, first we had to be here when nobody else wanted to.
Yes, exactly.
Now that people want to be here, now we got to go. So I understand the frustration from that point, but it's definitely complicated. And I think that the sad part is that it affects us at every level. Like you said, it affects our schools. It affects our families because I think like Kimani, you go to school in the South, right? Like your cousins in Kent. And when I was in school, there were no Black students in Kent at all. And things just changed just like that. Things changed just like that. Brian, what is the next topic?
The next topic is reproductive rights, but before we transition into that next topic, I want to see if we can have our recorded performance by our first recorded performance. So we are going to be working on that right now. Is everybody able to hear the performance? Okay, well, in that case, I will try again.
Lift every voice and sing to the ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise like the listening skies. Let it resound like the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. They sing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
If you all could hear that, I want to once again thank Nisha Griffin for her submission of Lift Every Voice and Sing, or the Black National Anthem. We're glad to have it. Without further ado, we will move on to our next topic of reproductive rights. And with that, there is another interview of the Tahoma High School Black Student Union, of two members of that Black Student Union, and their thoughts on reproductive rights. Pulling all of your screens. We are about to play the interview.
Go. Hi, I'm Juan, and I'm Casey. And today we're going to talk about times of time incarcerated causing jobs. So states are kind of prejudiced against people some states that access to transportation. State that they will always getting to these states is a continuous access. So, our fight towards securing the
Okay. Kimani, Brooklyn, and Naomi, we looking forward to you leading this discussion. Kimani, would you like to speak first?
Sure. So that video, I actually took the audio was a little glitchy, but it was basically of the Black Student Union presidents at my school talking about their opinion on reproductive rights. As I'm sure we all know, over the summer, a law of Roe v. Wade was passed, basically saying that having a termination of your child or is illegal per se. So their thoughts on that was one Casey, she said that she believes that if you basically saying that at least in today's society, if you are like, for example, 14, 12 and cannot go and adopt a baby because they say you're too young, then why should you be forced to have a baby at 14 if that's too young to have a baby? So me, Naomi, and Brooklyn are going to dive into a conversation or a discussion a little bit about reproductive rights. And please feel free to ask any questions. And as of right now, I will pass the conversation off to Naomi.
Yeah, so luckily in the state of Washington, we are able, yes, Kobe, you are allowed to talk, by the way. So luckily in the state of Washington, we are able to get access to abortions if we choose to have one, but in multiple states, that right is either limited or not able at all. We're not able to get that at all. And I believe that it's important to like advocate for those in other states who can't get access to abortions and to make their voices heard.
Brooklyn, your thoughts on reproductive rights?
I feel like that, like if like somebody had like got pregnant like by assault or something, I feel like abortion should be available. And while it's not available in certain states, I feel like it's kind of unfair. But I also feel like, yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Adding on to that, one of my opinions per se is if you're not able to get a abortion in the U.S. because of something as assault per se, then there's a chance that people are going to that women are going to try to find unsafe ways to do that, which could do more harm than good. So in recent protests, it has been said that my body, my choice. And in my opinion, I believe that as well, that if in any situation that you get pregnant from, say, sexual assault, that it should be your choice whether you want to have that baby or not. And I believe in any way, if you get pregnant, it should be your choice how you want to handle that situation.
Exactly, and I do think abortions need to be more accessible, even regardless of like what state you are in, because there are a lot of people who also can't financially afford to have a child, and now they're at a point where it's like life-threatening to them and the child if they can't afford to keep it alive even.
So at this time, I believe we have all said anything we want to say. So if we would, we
Well, I
can
do-
open up the conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I want to ask a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
And just for the purposes of gender dynamics, I think you got to ask the question, if do you have a reaction to that, Brian or Kobe? Do you feel like when this happened that it put you in an uncomfortable space because you were like, oh shoot, I'm looking at all these women out there in the world that have such a strong opinion on this. Do you have a strong opinion on it, or did you just feel like, I don't know if I should speak? Kobe?
I don't think I really thought about it much, unless my parents were like talking about it or something. My mom had me when she was 19, and she was thinking of having an abortion, which I'm happy she didn't. But even though I could have just never existed, I feel like if I never existed, nobody would care because nobody would know it would have never existed. So, in my opinion, if it never comes into being, I don't see the big deal. For example, a lot of people think that Plan B is a bad thing now too, because Plan B is just like having an abortion. You're just blocking what could have been. But in my opinion, I don't think that's a big deal. And also, I know a lot of people argue for the my body, my choice, saying that the man should have a choice in having the child as well. But I feel like I disagree with that because the man doesn't have to carry a child in his womb for 9 months and go through a bunch of pain and such to give birth to that child. So that's just my thoughts.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree with Kobe, especially on that final point, just in the sense that a man doesn't have to carry a child for 9 months. In terms of having strong opinions, it kind of makes me think about family. In essence, like, even though it might not directly affect me, it would affect family members in terms of their rights and what they can choose to do.
I agree with Brian. I feel like everybody should have their own choice and that nothing should really be forced on them unless it's putting other people in harm's way. For example, getting the COVID vaccine, in my opinion, was a smart thing to do because you're not risking other people as well. It's not just about yourself, it's also about the people around you. And I don't feel like abortion really hurts the people around you.
Okay, so I'll be messy. I'll be messy just for the sake of argument. So when you say that no other person is affected, are you saying that this potential child, and you put it in quotations, are you saying the potential child is not a person who's affected? Or go ahead, Kobe.
Oh, well, what do you think defines a person?
What do I think defines a person? Man, that's a deep question. I guess I would just say a sense of awareness. You'd have a physical body and a sense of awareness. I don't even know when that starts and stops. I'm an attorney. I can tell you what the court says, but I'm not sure that's really meaningful in terms of the question you're asking. I would say this, and this might be spicy, but no one has ever approached a person who's pregnant in a grocery store and said, like, congratulations on that fetus. Like, it's never happened. They say, like, congratulations on the baby that you're gonna have. That's not like a drop the mic comment or anything like that, but it just goes to that there's a difference between our politics and like the arguments that happen in the political sphere and the conversations people have in everyday life. So like if we were to just talk about a person you saw walking on the street and they're pregnant, you say they have a baby. But if you have a conversation like this and we talk about substantive rights and taking away people's decision-making power, then we drill down super far. And I think that to me is always the takeaway, which is that when you have a conversation about adding or removing rights, you should probably take it a step further. Like maybe that grocery store analysis is not enough, right? Because we're not just talking. Now there's an action item and something that might impact someone's life. And so then you'd say, well, who's someone, right? And then you'd come back to your original question. And that's the point, is that it's complicated. It's very complicated. But at the end of the day, I tend to lean towards this idea that if something is available, it starts out available. So if there's a substantive right that you have, it's really difficult moving forward in time to take it away, right? So if you've been able to drive the car for 50 years and then in year 51, they say, no more driving, you're going to be like, I've been driving for 50 years. So, that just becomes a real challenge. Kimani?
Adding on to what you were saying, I feel like before Roe v. Wade became a thing, that I think people acknowledged that you can have an abortion, but I don't think it was always like this big issue that was like you should not have this at all. I think it was something people didn't really acknowledge until all of a sudden that this law came into place, and it then became acknowledged, and that's when we started having these conversations about it. So in my opinion, if it wasn't as like it was acknowledged before, but it wasn't like a whole debate about it, if it wasn't technically an extreme problem then, I don't see why it should be an extreme problem now. But that's my take on it.
Okay, well, here's a follow-up question. Go ahead, Kobe.
Well, you asked me a question earlier. I wouldn't consider a fetus a person, but that's just my opinion. But obviously, I haven't put hours and hours into studying what makes a person or listening to other people's perspectives. But I would say what makes a person is the memories they have and like their emotions, because what's the main difference between something that's non-sentient and something that's sentient, I would say, is like your brain and the emotions that it's capable of portraying. I don't think a fetus can show emotion, and I know a fetus can't show emotion based on stuff resources I have available. And I would say the fact that there's no memories or emotion behind it, I wouldn't say it's a person, is basically what I'm trying to say. Kind of like how if someone's in a vegetable state, they no longer have those memories or emotions. Well, to a certain extent, the people around them still have them, but you're allowed to pull the plug because that person won't be able to create anymore and they can't live life anymore.
Very spicy, Kobe. Very spicy. It's spicy for a couple of reasons, because that's the legal definition of death, is where one has no awareness. And I think you basically answered the question in a very similar way to me, with putting cognitive ability in the front, or cognitive awareness in the front. Kimani, was your hand up?
Yeah, I actually wanted to acknowledge a question that was in the chat. What if the father wants the child, but the mother carrying the fetus does not? I think that would bring up a conversation that needs to be had between the mother and the father. That's my take on it. But if you guys, Kobe or Naomi or Brooklyn or Brian, if you guys have another answer or opinion on that question.
For me, I don't see why you would get with somebody that you don't have similar views with. If you want to marry someone, if you want to have sex with that person and risk having a child, I feel like your views should align as to what you think is okay, and also to what you want in the future. Because if you don't want a kid, but your partner does, that relationship isn't going to work out. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, to answer Bridget's question, I think that at the end of the day, it's the mother's choice on whether they want to carry the baby or not. Because like Ryan said, it's the mother who's carrying the baby for 9 months, not the father.
Okay. Do you feel like people are at least entitled to a conversation? And that's building off of the question that was asked.
Sorry.
I feel like that the father of the child should be entitled to a conversation. Like, I feel like that on her own, the mom should just not necessarily be allowed to just abort the baby without a conversation, but I feel like a conversation should be had, since technically, necessarily, it is like half the guy's child or his child.
Adding on to what Brooklyn was saying, I think there should be a conversation had because at the end of the day, that's both of your DNA going together into a child, and therefore it's both of the father should be able to have an opinion on the matter, but I also think that at the end of the day, it's the mother who's carrying the baby, so it's the mother who gets to decide. But at the same time, as I said, there should at least be a conversation about it. But at the end of the day, I believe it's the mother's decision because it's her body, and it's her body that's going through all the pain of that comes with carrying a child.
Okay, so if we were to drill down, the basic problem is that if you remove the right to an abortion, you're compelling the completion of a pregnancy. Okay.
Yes.
So your positions are that you shouldn't be able to be compelled to complete something like that by anybody else.
Yeah, I think it should be your own decision. And I think, like you were saying earlier, being I think you should be able to have a choice. And because of this law, your ability to make a choice has been taken away. So it then makes you feel pressured, like you have to have this child. And at the same time, I think because of everything that's going on, if a mother did want to choose or want to have an abortion, and then makes her feel like a monster for not wanting to have that said child, which I think is unfair, because there are multiple reasons why a woman could not want to have the baby. It could be because of sexual assault. It could be because she's not able to provide for the baby. And at the same time, you will never understand nor know the reasons. Any person can never really understand or know the reasons of why a mother would want to end her pregnancy. But at the end of the day, to me, that's nobody else's business besides hers. But that's my take.
Okay. Well, I have to ask this question because this comes up all the time. If somebody told you that the number one cause of death, because this is Kanye West, you may have heard this. If somebody told you that the number one cause of death among African Americans was abortion, if they put it in those terms, does that change anything for you, or does that more of a statement about the economic status of Black Americans in this country?
I think it changes at least a little bit for me, because at the end of the day, in the health field, there are multiple causes of death for African Americans, because there's a different standard for care for healthcare for African Americans. But I still believe that at the end of the day, even if you are African American, it is your choice to go through with an abortion. And I think even any woman going through an abortion, you know the stakes, and you know that there are chances. And some women are willing to go through with an abortion, even still knowing those chances. So to me, it has an effect on my opinion, but not that big of an effect.
I think that statistic is taken out of context to make it sound like it actually means something. I feel like that's kind of a dumb thing to say, in my opinion, because having the child would just make them less financially stable, which wouldn't make their situation better in any way. Well, obviously, depending on the circumstances, but most likely it'll just make them have to pay more money and have another mouth to feed. And even just hospital bills for giving birth to a child is crazy. So I wouldn't say that statement really benefits anybody at all, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet.
So you would agree then that ultimately it is a reflection of the financial status?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian, Naomi, Brooklyn?
I think I've heard what you're talking about coming from Kanye, and I believe I remember he said that it was in the millions, and that number is surprising. It should be surprising to anybody, to say the least. But and what it sort of makes me think about at the same time, which is going to bring me to a question, is if I'm correct in remembering this, Ronald Reagan said that he believes that abortion should be accessible and safe, but rare. And I kind of want to know what all of your thoughts are about that. Should it be something that should be happening with a lot of frequency, or does that make any difference? Or should it be like in certain scenarios where it should be available?
Me personally, I think there's bigger problems in the world, but I would say I agree with him. I think it should be available. I feel like I'd rather them have something safe that some people don't agree with versus them having to do something very unsafe that could possibly get them killed or hurt in some way just because some people don't agree with what they want to do.
I agree with Kobe. I think it should be accessible to really anyone, because if you're not able to go through with an abortion legally, then there are going to be back doors that you can take that aren't as safe as maybe being able to have a safe abortion. So, and just because, I mean, if we think about it, in the world, a lot of people don't like what you do sometimes, but you do it anyway. So I think if just because people don't like what you're doing shouldn't stop you from doing it. And it's not, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to stop anybody from doing it. So I would rather women have a safe option than doing it in a non-safe way.
Also, I just want to, correct myself. I think I meant to say John F. Kennedy, not Ronald Reagan. But nonetheless, thank you for your comments on that, Imani.
Brooklyn or Naomi, you guys have a take on it?
If I'm being honest, I feel like I can't really speak too much on it because honestly, I personally don't really believe in abortions, but I feel like it should be accessible but not constant. Like it was brought up earlier, I feel like it should be rare in cases of like sexual assault and things like that.
Before we go to Kobe, I just want to say thank you for that, because I do think that there is more diversity on this topic than is typically represented. I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe agree with you, but they're not comfortable speaking because there's so much momentum around the conversation around rights being removed, right? So it's like, it's hard to say that out loud at a time when, you know, we're complaining about the substantive right being removed, and you're saying, well, I don't want to talk about the right being removed, but I can tell you from a personal belief standpoint, it wasn't something I was down with from the beginning. I can identify with that. I don't think you're alone in that, but I think that maybe we're at a place culturally where that would be discouraged a lot of times. Like you saying that out loud would be discouraged, which I think we can move on. But I did want to bring up this subtopic, Brian, if you're okay with it, with this idea of cancel culture and kind of your guys' response to cancel culture, because like something that Brooklyn just said out loud, for example, in today's world could be the type of thing where people, if she were to tweet that out, that tweet would get reshared 100,000 times. And then there would be somebody commenting on Brooklyn's tweet talking about how she's fill in the blank, right? And you guys that have experience with Brooklyn, you know who she is on some level, and you would see a bunch of people saying stuff about her. Do you think that we live in that's okay, that response that we have culturally where because we disagree with people, we throw them to the wolves? Is that okay? Or is that just a consequence of free speech? What do we think?
I don't think that cancel culture essentially is a solution, because I feel like it doesn't allow for the conversation or the context to be considered. Like, you know, if you're quick to cancel, then it doesn't really allow for progress, essentially. I think that it can be taken too far, essentially. But in short, that's kind of my stance on it.
I agree with Brian. I think cancel culture, I don't think it's effective at all. It basically is just so like if someone does something you don't like, it's just boom, they're relevant, they're canceled, everything else. And I think cancel culture is a really fast way to honestly ruin someone's life. Like even with celebrities, if they say something wrong or do something somebody doesn't like and cancel culture gets to them, it could lead to the end of their career. So I don't think cancel culture is honestly necessary, in my opinion.
I also agree with that.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I agree with that because I feel like it's like if we're supposed to be entitled to free speech and be able to have our own opinions, why should we be canceled? And like I have had that abortion conversation with a lot of people, and a lot of people did try to shut me down and change my opinion. But I feel like canceling somebody and trying to shut out their opinion won't help because you can't necessarily change their own opinion.
Okay. Kobe?
I agree mostly. I do kind of disagree about the free speech part because, you know, you have free speech, but you're not free of the consequences that come with that. So I don't think you can just say whatever you want and expect no consequences because that's not how the world works. But I agree mostly with how toxic cancel culture can be, that it isn't progressive is basically what I'm trying to say.
Okay, but let me ask you this then. So you said that there's consequences for what you say, but do you think that there's a difference between disagreeing with somebody and then creating a label based on the fact that you disagree?
My bad. What I mostly meant by that was like I think I kind of took a different context than what y'all were saying. I was thinking more of like hate speech or just like mostly hate speech and stuff. People are like, you can't say that, or you have free speech, so you should be able to say what you said. It's just that Brooklyn said, why would you have free speech if you get like canceled for it or something? And like my first thought was like, you know, you can have free speech, but that doesn't mean you're free from the consequences because, you know, your words can hurt other people or it could be misinformation or stuff like that, I guess.
Right, but that's the thing. This is I'm trying to push you on this because I think this is a really hard question to answer. So, like you said, your words can hurt people, but when you make a tweet, for example, do you think that every single time you make a tweet that you're taking responsibility for the feelings of every single person out there who might see your tweet? Or do you think that you're allowed in today's age to literally just send that message, click enter, and just say, I just want to make this statement for the 5 or 6 people that this is intended for, even if it's 500 people that it's intended for, thousands of people, right, can reproduce your own statement. And now you're responsible for everybody's feelings. Do you have a response to that?
I mean, I feel like if you don't want your opinion to affect other people, then don't post it online. Keep it to yourself. And if you don't mind it hurting other people, just be open to listening to what they have to say as well. But that's why I also said I think cancel culture is toxic because it's not progressive and it doesn't allow for conversations. But I do not think that free speech should be 100% guaranteed for certain aspects of it. By that, I mean, like, I don't think people should be free of consequences. But I guess that's kind of out of context of this conversation.
Oh, yes and no. I mean, I think that the challenge is that you could, I think sometimes we as people say something and we assume that everyone is going to interpret it correctly. And it's a tough assumption to make. You know, for example, I asked a question earlier where I said, does anyone think they're entitled to a piece of land, right? And someone can take that audio snippet and they can go, he supports gentrification, share. And then there's a million people out there go, this guy should resign from his position on the MLK coalition because he doesn't respect culture and history in our neighborhoods. None of that's true, right? I simply asked a question that I think is an important question to ask. But because it could be misinterpreted by somebody else, should I not ask that question? And that's what I was pushing on. Like there's certain kinds of conversations that don't happen because of that anxiety, which is why earlier I was saying I appreciate Brooklyn talking. Kimani?
I think that's a really good question. That's the thing with cancel culture. Basically how your point was just because you asked a question that you could easily be canceled for that. I don't think that's fair, and honestly I believe that everyone is entitled to an opinion, but I don't think that opinion often needs to be shared all the time unless asked for. And I think that's what cancel culture is basically other people giving your opinion giving their opinion on what someone else says just because they feel like it, which I don't always find effective.
Naomi, and then Kobe.
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat your question, please?
I mean, what are your feelings on cancel culture? Like, how do you feel about it?
But like they said, I just think it's ineffective of the person who made a statement in the first place, because like if it's in terms of like educating them on one point of view, like just basically yelling at them or basically saying like, you're wrong, like you're canceled, you're done, doesn't really help them grow or see your point of view of anything. If they're saying negative or anything, or just like, even a neutral statement, I think there's gonna maybe not retaliate, but just like further believe that what they're saying is right and like kind of do that sort of to retaliate. I don't really know.
Okay. Kobe?
I don't think I have anything more to add at the moment.
What I was thinking here, or actually before I want to go on, I was made aware that I meant Bill Clinton when I was talking about what I often mix up my presidents, but yeah, Bill Clinton. Anyways, back to cancel culture. I think that it can be used as a fear tactic, where it's like, you should be afraid to say this, whether or not you believe this. That's not what's being cared about. It's just that you can't say it. And we've all kind of mentioned the conversation piece, which I think is the most important to really, make sure that to understand where they're coming from and if this person is misinformed. That's kind of what it's all about. Is it, are you informed about really what you're saying? And if so, then that brings the question, what did you mean by this originally? But I think overall, it doesn't seem like it's the overall solution.
All right. We have about 15 minutes left, so I just want to round us off with the most important thing that we can talk about today, which is sort of how Dr. King's legacy impacts us today, or what our belief is on his legacy. And I want to make sure that I hear from everybody. So Brooklyn, let's start with you.
Kimani, do you want to talk about the importance of MLK's legacy?
Sure. So, in my opinion, I think that what he stood for back then has impacted basically how our society is today. I think I said this earlier, but I think there's still ways our society can improve, but I think it has improved a lot from what it was back then, and I think that's because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for and the actions that he took. At the end of the day, I think if you want change, you have to be prepared to take action, and that's exactly what Martin Luther King did, and he did it in a peaceful way. And I think what he stood for and everything that he did helped us get where we are today.
Brian?
Yeah, I think it's always relevant. Like Martin Luther King especially, but also just, the movement that was around him, and thinking about the other people who have contributed to what society looks like today. There's plenty to name. I think about John Lewis immediately, but for MLK, in terms of his message and his method of bringing people together for change, understanding that there's change that needs to happen, and that there are voices that need to be uplifted, hence our theme. And the direction of change starts with us. This is why we're here for this youth event, is to talk about these things and think about ways that we can make change together.
Thank you for that. Naomi?
Yes, I definitely believe that Martin Luther King's legacy set a foundation for others to advocate for human rights in America.
Sorry.
Oh, I said that I think Martin Luther King's legacy definitely set the foundation for others to advocate for human rights in America.
Okay, and do you think that in today's world, do you think that his model of nonviolence and social resistance through demonstrations that are not violent, do you think that's still effective? I mean, and I'm asking this question to all of you because I want to push you on this. George Floyd, all these different incidents that we've seen, they have not necessarily gone the Kingian way as far as our responses, but they have resulted in some changes for policy, right? Like in Seattle, for example, we had the marches, there was some property damage, but at the same time, there was a change in our budget with law enforcement. So there has been some movement that comes with the chaos. So do we think that the Kingian way is still effective, or do we think that there's more modes of protest that need to be used?
I definitely believe that the Kingian way is still very effective, but I do think that in some cases where, society is just kind of like not like hearing what you have to say, or like I think some other cases kind of do have to be, implemented as though not as extreme to make your voices heard.
I think that there are definitely multiple types of effective protest. I do think that there's still power to peaceful protest because it makes it so that there's no excuse for the people who you want to respond to what's being protested for. If we come out here peacefully, then you can't say anything else about us. You have to hear our voices. And that's the loudest thing when it comes to peaceful protest. Because for anything else, things can be blown out of proportion and controversies can arise that can sometimes take away from the message overall.
Kimani and then Kobe.
Adding on to what Naomi and both Brian said, I agree with both of them. And I heard what Brian said about peaceful protest. And I do think that peaceful protest can be very powerful, but I do think sometimes that using your voice or just you having something to say can be overlooked and therefore not getting you what you need. So I do think the King's Way is effective, but I also think there are more effective ways. And I'm not saying that like rioting and all that is an effective way, but I am saying that protesting is a good way. And I think there are multiple ways to protest and go about it without harming anyone or harming anything.
Kobe.
I agree with them about protests. I think my main thing I take from Martin Luther King is that government, law, basically anything around you, you should never automatically think about that as like a moral compass or like the truth for anything. Even science, for example, although most of that stuff I would agree with, I'd say you should doubt everything you hear until you do your own ample research to understand like what you think is good, what you think is true, and to stand up for what you think is true and what you think is good. And if you think the government or people around you are lying to you, then I think you should stand up for that and try to spread your truth to everybody else.
Thank you for that. I will round this off by saying that whenever I think about Dr. King, I think about a person who was willing to work with folks who maybe he didn't have a lot in common with, or people maybe that he wouldn't have agreed with under any other circumstances. I think about like Lyndon Johnson is president who signs the Civil Rights Act, but Lyndon Johnson is a Southern Democrat at the time. So he comes from discrimination, a culture of discrimination, and he has to sit down across from a Black man from the South, from Atlanta, and Dr. King, and talk about ways to incorporate African Americans into first-class citizenship in the United States. And you think about how unnatural that conversation would be between any two other people from the South at the time, one being Black, one being white. But because those people did come together, and because of the efforts of Dr. King to collude with people across the United States, some of which, frankly, he had philosophical disagreements with. Like even Stokely Carmichael, members of the Black Panther Party eventually that he ran into. They didn't all agree all the time, but they put those things to the side in order to come up with, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, which are things that to this day we still utilize, and it's because of that spirit of tolerance and the willingness to work together. And that's what'll always stick with me when I think of Dr. King. And then when I think about what's happening now, I think about how we live in an environment where if you don't get people's attention, regardless of how you do it, you don't get substantive change. You don't get a change in policy. And so, it's hard for me because I'm a prosecutor myself. Like when people break the law, I have to deal with that. And so I'd never tell people to go out and break the law. But like Kobe said, the law is not necessarily legitimate by default. And sometimes, things have to happen that get the lawmakers' attention, right? And so that there's a really thin line between not doing enough and doing too much. And I think that's what Brian was speaking to. So if you start a fire in a trash can and they go, oh, that's a fire in a trash can, we can put that out with a dose of water. But if you light something on fire that's an accelerant and then the fire department comes, that gets someone's attention. And then you go, but that's arson. And I'm like, that is arson. And you see that it's tough because you want the attention so that the change will come. But if you do it in the wrong way, then everybody who disagrees with you will say, see, they didn't deserve it in the first place. And that's the burden a lot of times, I think, with being a Black American, is that no matter what you do, you will be wrong. And you have to live in comfort with that knowledge that you're going to be wrong. And you have to live in comfort with the knowledge that there's no empathy and that people are not going to understand your position. And if anything, the whole purpose of this program for you all here is to grow in the confidence to hold your position no matter what. That's Dr. King. Hold your position no matter what. He gave his speech near the end of his life when he had an idea that his life could be coming to an end. And he was like, listen, I've seen the mountaintop. He's not going to change. He refused to change. 4 People's Campaign, boom, dead. That's where it ended. And he probably knew that was going to happen. But he held this position because he believed in it. And I want you guys to go out into the world and believe in yourselves as leaders and as Black leaders. So thank you for doing this event. And at this point, I think we can call it a wrap. Congratulations on completing this internship and also providing this event to the community to hear your voices and know that the next generation of leaders is coming and they're here.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording